Hello, my dear students. In our further discussion, I would like to draw your attention on what Chillingworth is planning, or what Chillingworth is planning about, thinking about taking revenge. So, as soon as he comes to know about this particular information, that Haster's sexual partner and his Pearl's father, the speech that he's about to give, before the public is rife with double meanings. On one level, he gives a public chastisement of Hester for not naming her lover. Okay? Or for another level, he makes a personal plea to her to name him as a lover and Pearl's father because he is too morally weak to do so himself. Such a commitment of typical sin. Ironically, what is initially intended to be a speech about Hester becomes a greater commentary about his own sinful behavior. So, in this particular speech, Dimmesdale asks Hester to recognize his accountability in addressing her, and he begs her to do what he cannot do himself. Dimmesdale has not courage. He doesn't show the courage to accept his fault publicly, but he is forcing Hester Prynne to announce the reality before the people. It is again a great irony. So he begs to her to what he cannot do himself. Publicly, he is her spiritual leader, and as such, he is responsible for her moral behavior. He was her lover. And he says the blame of the horrible situation that she is in. Whatever she is suffering from, he is the outcome. These sufferings are the outcome of that particular person. His sufferings, mental suffering, that he was not able to accept his faults, his sin before the public. And he was trying to suppress this particular typical commitment. He then admonishes her. Very sad. Again, as a spiritual leader, again forcing just to name the accomplice. When then he goes on the charge with her naming the transgressor, we understand that he is privately pleading her to expose him publicly and thereby help ensure his salvation. For without public repentance, salvation is not attainable. He is of the view that Hester Prynne must publicly announce the name of her lover so that his sin will be put forth before the public, and that is how he'll be getting the sense of salvation, because the salvation is not possible without the real repentance. Okay? Further, we come to know ultimately his official public duty and his private personal intentions are one and the same: to admonish Hester to expose her lovers his own immorality because he is too morally weak to do this particular thing himself before the public. Again, back in prison, Hester is in a state of nervous frenzy, and Pearl writes painful convulsion. Or there, she is suffering from some kind of problem. So that evening, when Roger Chillingworth enters the prison cell, she fears his intentions. But he gives Pearl a draught of medicine because he was very much skilled on medicines. He had been practicing that, and he was known for that also. So it creates ease in the child's whole body, and her pain is immediately lessened, and she falls asleep. After he persuades Hester to drink a sedative to calm her frayed nerves, the two sit and talk intimately and sympathetically, each of them accepting a measure of blame for Hester's adulterous affair. Now the Chillingworth, the injured husband, seeks no revenge against Hester. He doesn't want to take revenge on her. But he is determined that Timsdale will certainly be punished by him. Okay? Hester takes an oath to keep Chillingworth's identity. It will be kept as a secret. She assures him, although she expresses the fear that her vow of silence may prove the ruin of her soul. So further, if we analyze this particular chapter, Hawthorne does not summarize or discuss the actions of his characters, nor does he tell the reader what to think. Instead, he puts Hester and Chillingworth together and lets the reader learn about their attitudes and their relationship to each other, through their dialogue. By juxtaposing heavily prosaic chapters like chapter 3 with ones dominated by characters' dialogue. Those prolonged dialogues are going on. You might have seen in the films also when hero and heroines, after being separated, they come to meet again. So there is a prolonged dialogue. So this is what is happening in this particular chapter. Hawthorne creates a pattern in the novel that heightens the dramatic content of the dialogue chapters. Okay? Further into chapter 4, my dear students, it is especially important to understanding Chillingworth. Hawthorne gives a view of what he has been as well as what he has to become. Throughout the novel, he is referred to as a scholar. He was a great scholar. He was having the knowledge of medical science. A man most interested in studying. Most of the time, he spent his hours just like a bookworm, He was having a bookish mentality. So reading about human behavior. Unfortunately, he could not maintain his behavior. However, Chillingworth hints that in his pursuit of scholarship, he has failed both Hester and himself. He admits this fact. Because Hester also didn't like prolonged studying, He admits to her, I betrayed thy budding youth in a false and unnatural relation with my decay, I unquote. We can initially sympathize with this lonely scholar, who has been robbed of his wife. It is, circumstances. But we also can see the element of his future self-destruction and his, determination to discover the man who has offended him. So the only goal of his life, what? Just to find out that man? Reverend Dimmesdale. So in fact, as Hester and Chillingworth continue their conversation, we see the development of Chillingworth as one of the novel's symbols of evil. So now the Chillingworth has become the symbol of evil, my dear students. In further chapters, we come to know that Hester Prynne's imprisonment is now over. It has come to an end. Hester is now free to go anywhere in the world, yet she does not leave Boston. Instead, she chooses to move in a small seaside cottage. She starts living, just trying to have her livelihood. Her work is a great demand. She was a very skilled lady, She supports himself and Pearl through her skill as a seamstress. She started sewing. Her work is it is demanded by the masses. Official ceremonies for the marriages, but the people are reluctant to give her order about the marriage wealth, marriage cloths. I don't know. It was again a puritanical austerity. And among the fashionable women of the town, for every occasion except a wedding, very sad. Again the puritanical hard-headedness. Despite the popularity of her sewing, however, she is a social outcast, the target of vicious abuse by the community. She endures the abuse patiently. She was really an epitome of great tolerance. Ironically, she begins to believe that the scarlet A, later A, allows her to sense sinful and immoral feelings in other people. Further, in chapter 5, as we move ahead, we come to know that Hastur and Pearl and the beginning of the development of the Hastur and Scarlet as two of the major symbols of the romance. By positioning Hastur's cottage between the town and the wilderness, physically isolated from the community. Wilderness, isolation, redemption, keeping herself aloof, symbolism, socially outcasted. These things really create a gloomy picture in the mind of the readers of this novel. So by positioning Hastur cottage between the town and the wilderness, physically isolated, the author confirms and builds the image of her, and that was portrayed in the first scaffold scene, that of an outcast of the society being punished for her sin. And as a product of nature, society views her as the figure, the body, the reality of the sin. Despite Hastur's apparent humility and her refusal to strike back at the community, she resents and inwardly rebels against the viciousness of the Puritan persecutors. She becomes a living symbol of sin to the town people, who view her not as an individual but as an embodiment of evil in the world. So twice in chapter, Hawthorne alludes to the communities using Hastur's errant behavior as a testament of immorality. For moralists, he represents woman's frailty. Frailty, thy name is for me. You must be reminding Hamlet. For moralists, he represents woman's frailty and the sinful passion. And when she attends church, she is often the subject of the preacher's sermon. Again, banished by the society to live her life forever as an outcast, Hastur's skill in the needlework is nevertheless in great demand. People have been taking great care of this particular skill. Hawthorne derisively condemns Boston's Puritan citizens throughout the novel, but here in this particular chapter 5, his criticism is especially sharp. The very community members most appalled by Hastur's past conduct favor her sewing skills. Sewing? Needlework. But they deem their demand for her work almost as a charity, as if they are doing her the favor in having her sew garments of them. Their small-mindedness and contemptuous attitudes are best exemplified in their refusal to allow Hastur to sew garments for weddings. No, wedding garments not allowed, as if she would contaminate the sacredness of marriage. Very, very sad. The irony between the townspeople's condemnation of Hastur in her providing garments for them is even greater when we learn that Hastur is not overly proud of her work. Although Hastur has Hawthorne terms a taste for the gorgeously beautiful, she rejects ornamentation as a sin. We must consider that Hastur, no matter how much she inwardly rebels against the hypocrisy of Puritan society, still conforms to the moral strictness associated with Puritanism. Okay? So, in the further chapter, we come to know that whereas publicly the latter, that particular latter, again and again, that later is a point of discussion. Hastur clothing is associated with the theme. Whereas publicly the latter inflicts scorn on Hastur, it also endows her with a new private sense of others' own sinful thoughts and behavior. She gains a sympathetic knowledge of the hidden sin in other hearts. A scarlet later, what it represents, separates Hastur from society. But it enables her to recognize sin in the very same society that banishes her. Hawthorne uses this dichotomy, to point out the hypocritical nature of Puritanism. Now we come to know that very, very important point of this novel. Hypocritical Puritanism. Those who condemn Hester are themselves condemnable according to their own set of values, similar to Hester's becoming a living symbol of immoral behavior. Now, a Scarlet A becomes an object with a life seemingly its own. Whenever Hester is in the presence of a person who is masking a personal sin, the red infamy upon her breast would give a sympathetic throb. You must be remembering the Custom House preface. Hawthorne describes the penchant for mixing fantasy with fact, and this technique is evident in the treatment of this particular Scarlet Lady. In the physical terms, the emblem is only so much fabric and thread, but Hawthorne's use of symbol at various points in the story adds dimensions of fantasy to factual description. And further chapter 5, 6, 7, you get such kind of information as, at least according to some town people, the Scarlet A, literally she is Hester's chest in that red hot with the infernal fire. It glows in the dark at night. These accounts create doubt in the reader's mind regarding the true nature and functions of the symbol. Hawthorne's imbuing the Scarlet A with characteristics that are both fantastical and symbolic is evident throughout the novel, particularly when Chillingworth sees a Scarlet A emblazoned on the Dimmesdale's bare chest when he was treating him. When town people see a giant Scarlet A in the sky, when that meteor scenes is there on the sky, there is inclusion of meteor. It also symbolizes something very important. It symbolizes the gloom of those people who were thronged together. They were three. You will come to know. So, when the bare chest was opened by Chillingworth, that opening was a technique common to the romance genre, because the things get unfolded slowly and slowly. Further, I would like to draw your attention on the Pearl and her attitude, who is named because he came off that great prize, rose into the physically beautiful. As the chapter moves ahead, Pearl is growing better and better, but she is growing churlish. Grows into a physically beautiful, vigorous and graceful little girl. She is radiant in the rich and elaborate dresses that Hester sews for her. Inwardly, however, Pearl possesses a complex character. She shows an unusual depth of mind coupled with a fiery passion that Hester is incapable of controlling, either with kindness or threats. So gradually, she is becoming uncontrollable. So she shows a love of mischief and disrespect for authority, which frequently reminds Hester of her own sin of passion. So both Hester and Pearl are excluded by the society, from the society, and they are constant companions. So their being outcast have generated the sense of companionship between mother and daughter. And Pearl is on the walks with her mother. She occasionally finds herself surrounded by some curious children of the village. Rather than attempt to make friends with them, no, she is not willing to make friends. She pelts them with stones and violent words. Don't come to me. Pearl's only companion in her playtime is her imagination. And significantly, in her games of make-believe, she never creates friends. She creates only enemies. So Puritans whom she pretends to destroy, but the object that most captures her imagination is the Scarlet Lady. Why my mother is wearing that? Okay? So in the forthcoming chapters, we shall be discussing about how the plot unfolds itself.